Have you ever walked down the streets, busy streets, mind you, and felt that no one was there? I have. I did the other night anyway. Busiest evening in downtown I can remember. Dozens of faces shuffling about, eyes a blank canvas no artist would ever touch, illuminated only by streetlight and the haze of Facebook updates. I brushed against a man with ripped sleeves and black stains upon his shirt. I don't think he noticed. It's a strange feeling, staring into so many glassy faces, wondering if they can see you, wondering if you're really seeing them. But I'm certain they saw the man in the black jacket. He walked tall, rigid but slower than the rest, like he had nowhere to be but was determined to get there. He was a dark pale, if that makes sense, like his skin saw far too many suns and his tan was growing weary. His jacket, shirt, pants, and boots were all black, neatly kept if frayed around the edges. His jacket furrowed toward his left hip like it concealed something. His face was like splintered marble. You could have gone rock climbing on his ridges. His eyes were the most interesting, if only because I couldn't see them. Even in the late evening light, he deemed it necessary to don a pair of shades. Everyone gave him a wide berth. All it took was a quick glance and they scattered. One woman pulled her children aside so she was between them and the man as he passed. He seemed to pay no mind. He was a full-bellied shark in a sea of fish. I am not what is commonly called a social animal. My introverted mother left me with one bullet point before departing from this existence. Mind yourself. Keep to yourself. Others will do likely. I too scattered from his wake as he passed. A chill ran down my spine, and I half expected his hands to grab me from the back, and I shuddered off the feeling with a violent torrent of psychotic twitches. The flocks of sheep once again engulfed me, and I was ashamed to feel safe. Then came the girl. She padded along like a stuffed animal come to life, a great big head supported by a 6 or 7-year-old body. Big, round blue eyes with long black lashes. There may have been a tiny stub of a nose hidden behind the dirt. I suspected her long hair had been brown once. The wash of the gutter had given it a green tint. The grunge of the alleys had caked it with a dryness that was unwashable. Dark strands of what must have been a bow at one point hinted a contrast to her hair. She wore a tattered red dress that had aged to a pale pink. She was barefoot, save for a single sock littered with holes. The teddy bear she held was in no better condition, stained, matted fur, a wad of gum stuck to his head in replace of a missing eye. She went about on thin legs, holding up an empty soup can, giving it a few shakes before her lips parted in a humble request. Her can did not jingle. The sheep kept looking forward, or downward, but never in her direction. A large man almost stepped on her and she scurried with swift legs to safety, giving her bear a reassuring squeeze after the incident. When her can came to me, I at least gave it a look. I at least accepted her existence. Those big glazed eyes gleamed up at me like glitter. She coughed, but didn't let it scar her pitch. With my mother's throaty, disciplinary voice ringing in my head, I turned and continued on my way. I heard the padding of her bare feet fade off. Her can still made no rattle. "It's none of your business," I heard my mother say. "She'll fend for herself. They all will. Best not to mind anyone." I continued through the herd. The alleyway I eventually came to was a welcome escape from the flow of drudgery upon the street. I gulped down fresh air after surfacing from the festering stink of cologne and perfume. As if motivated by irony, the musty humidity of the rotting alley washed over me. I heard the hiss of a feline and the splash of a puddle, but the cat was too quick for my eyes. I coughed on this new stink and hammered a cigarette out of its pack. The subtle click of my Zippo was contrasted by a violent crash that echoed toward me along the brick walls. The green haze toward the opposite end of the alley was broken by a tiny silhouette that bounced furiously towards me. As it emerged from the vapor, so too did the squeaking sound of a weeping child. It was Soup Can Girl. She ran swift for her tiny legs, the limbs of her bear flapping madly as she held him tight. Her eyes were red, her cheeks stained with tears, and the flash of blood sparkled on her lips. Though she ran toward me, I don't think I was seen. It was the opening to the alleyway on her radar, a means of escape. A horrid, guttural laugh echoed next, and I felt the hairs on my body erect as something else emerged from the haze. I can't fully describe what it was, or even what it appeared to be. All I know is it had the frigid porcelain mask of a smiling face, like the one you always see alongside a frowning face at old theaters. But what snaked behind was a twisting orgy of black, fleshy limbs that slapped against the pavement as it crawled forward in a torrent of motion. This, accompanied by the scarce light in the alleyway, made the beast seem more like a living mist than a creature.
"Don't run, Lily."
The words pulsated, not so much in the alley, but in my ear, like a sticky tongue, and I clawed at the sides of my head like I had fleas.
"Dinner is such a lovely time to talk."
The girl let out a gasping wail of fear. She stumbled on the scattered contents of an overturned garbage can and came down hard, her teddy bear spilling to the filthy ground. Unable to rise, she scurried on all fours behind a dumpster, where she huddled in the tightest fetal position I've ever seen, head buried between her knees, stick arms wrapped around her legs in a vice, and her tiny body quivering with heavy sobs. A helpless groan escaped me as I retched my head back toward the mass of people shuffling about not more than 20 feet away. They continued their shuffle. One looked over briefly before returning to the glow of his phone. Within the millisecond, I had pondered upon whether they did not see the duo or that they didn't care. I still do not know which frightens me more. The beast slowed its chase as it circled around the dumpster, crawling like a hideous insect-alligator hybrid. A giddy laughter slipped out from what sounded like sopping wet gums. Then came the throaty gurgle of a song of all things.
Little girl, come to me. I can give you all you wish. Tiny but plump, juicy and firm. You will make a wonderful dish. Down in my basement we may play, singing, dancing, the bed built for two. You will soon be inside of me, but not before I enter you.
Now there was nothing but oozing giggles of the thing and the low, heartbreaking cries of the little girl. The beast made no secret of its presence. She knew it was there, but refused to lend it a glance, keeping her face buried in her knees, her raspy sobs muffled. I think she knew what was coming. A knife twists in my heart as, in retrospect, I don't believe she cried for her life, but rather that her life had been dealt such a crappy hand. I know this part of the story. This is where your judgment seeps in. Why didn't I save her? Why didn't I rip the sheep mask from my face and become a human being? I wonder how many of you have ever mastered your fear enough to make such an accusation. The truth is, I was helpless, in body and mind. My skin had become the heaviest of lead as I watched the black mass of writhing, nauseating unholiness let out a last, high-pitched, throaty laugh of victory as it snaked forth a bony, twisted hand trimmed with dark red claws toward the little girl's head. She would die, and I was content to watch so long as it didn't see me. Jesus. The longest bony claw was inches from the girl's hair, when the thundering bang ricocheted through the tight alley walls like an explosion, drowning out my scream. It did not drown the monsters. The beast flew to the side violently, letting out a moaning cry that sounded like a throng of angry people vomiting into a megaphone. Like a drunken spider, it crawled backward away from the girl, leaving behind a glistening trail of black slime. It hissed, moaned, and screamed all at the same time with dozens of different voices, each voice a horrid crescendo of nails upon a chalkboard. He walked into view behind me so suddenly I jumped. It was Leatherman, shades and all, plumes of smoke still trailing from the black revolver in his hand. He walked toward the cowering thing as if it were his afternoon stroll. He took his time, as if reveling in the thing's angry howls and guttural screams. There was a harsh glint of steel as Leather produced the world's largest Bowie knife from his jacket, letting it hang at his side casually, but gently swaying it back and forth in a vengeful tease for the monster. The thing's limbs twitched like an overturned insect, fluid squirting from its wound, creating an ever-widening puddle of black that crawled over the concrete like it had a ravenous appetite of its own. The porcelain face remained smiling, but it quaked back and forth in rejection, accompanied by a high-pitched wail that sounded feminine, then masculine, and finally childlike. Leather ignored the wails, kicking aside the flailing claws, and placed a rock-heavy boot onto the beast, pinning it like trapped vermin. Claws flailed, clacking against the pavement in a panic. Several found their way into the man's leg, fresh blood running down his jeans. He paid no mind. Leather crouched down and went to work. With his back to me, I could only make out smooth, vigorous slicing motions. There were few, but there were enough. From the beast emitted every howl, human and animal, in existence, all shrill, all angry. Finally, the man tossed a long, snake-like object to the side. It slapped against the pavement, twitched violently for several moments, then lay still. It was soon accompanied by two fluorescent green orbs the size of tennis balls that splatted against the ground like wet hacky sacks, tiny spiderweb veins pulsating about their circumference before falling still. I felt bile rise in my throat. Leather stood, wiping the black slime from his blade upon his pant leg before slipping it back into his jacket. The creature's limbs had gone limp, though several still twitched. Its cries had gone low, but were still a horrible soundtrack. An orange light lit the twilight darkness, and suddenly Leather was puffing away on a Churchill, billowing wisps of smoke curling upward, circling his head like an ethereal crown.
How does purity feel, fuckface?
His voice was deep, but calm, resolute, like he was talking to a pouty child. The long neck that held the mask twitched and wobbled like a giraffe on cocaine, but raised enough to look dead up at the man.
You will never defeat us.
It croaked, a waterfall of slime pouring from the ovular mouth.
We are the shadows of nightmares, the orgasm of the damned. We are immune to your light. Faith is but a shield of paper. I ejaculate onto your crosses. Not anymore,
came Leather's calm interjection after a glow of embers lit up his face. The creature writhed viciously, attempting to escape the man's boot. Finally, it spat out a torrent of black spray from its now filthy porcelain face, before raging up at him once more.
I am the Prince of Rape, the Gorger of Children. I have bled angels.
The last word was croaked out with the deepest of throats, plagued by years of scotch and tobacco. I felt the marrow in my bones quake. Leather tossed his stogie, the red splotch sailing into the darkness like a shooting star. Grabbing the porcelain face with his left, he unsheathed his pistol with his right. I felt the click of the hammer resonate within the pavement.
You are the gutter's cunt,
he said coolly. He smashed the barrel of the pistol deep into the mouth of the porcelain face, which continued to smile up at him, even through the long crack that now split it.
And I am Hell's Dick.
The quickest flash, the loudest of bangs, and a torrent of black gunk splattered the crumbling concrete and gutter trash. The limbs lay still, until they began to quake, prompted by a single glowing green crack that spiderwebbed into hundreds within seconds, spreading over the corpse like a pulsating wave. The glow dissipated, and the thing's body crumbled away like a shattered vase. And from out of the rubble scurried a dozen pale creatures with bodies of babies, their eyes glowing green, their mouths open, and emitting piercing shrieks as they scurried about with the speed of rats. One clamped itself onto Leather's leg, and he swatted it with the butt of his pistol as he would a rat. It flew and splattered onto the wall amidst a long streak of bright green ooze. Another hissed up at him, revealing rows of tiny but glistening fangs. With a disinterested sneer, Leather smashed his boot onto the thing's head, splitting it like an egg. Glowing green globules of slime and goo splattered radially around his foot, along with a host of scattering roaches. The bile that finally spilled past my lips stung my mouth and splattered onto the ground as I choked it out. Once again, my mother's voice rallied my thoughts. An empty belly is no good in any situation. The remaining baby creatures scurried away and disappeared down a nearby manhole, their furious chattering and tiny screeches echoing for a moment before leaving the three of us in silence. Leather gave an aggravated grunt as he once again knelt down, this time to wipe the gunk from his boots. After this, he popped 2 more rounds into the wheel of his pistol and gave it a robotic spin. A soft sound made him swing around, pistol once again at the ready, the waning light gleaming in his shades like 2 more evil eyes. It wasn't until then I felt the warm urine run down my pant leg, thinking I was next on his list. But the sound had been the girl, still whimpering next to the dumpster. Every few seconds her moaning shudders spiked with a harsh sniff. The man lowered his weapon and removed his glasses. His eyes were honestly the most intimidating thing I've seen all evening. They were silver, the pupils tiny. Their lack of saturation was compensated for by their glimmer. The depths of the silver twinkled and sparkled like the heavens of 1,000 different worlds. The lines on his face were soft by the time he stood and began walking toward the girl. His footfalls echoed up and down the alleyway, and she risked a peek from behind her knees. She quickly returned to her fetal sanctuary after seeing him approach. He knelt down, 3 feet from her, and reached out, holding the teddy bear she'd dropped. She slowly peered out again, looking at the bear, up at him, back to the bear. She took a long wipe of her nose on the back of her hand. Then she finally, slowly, reached out and took the bear, then quickly squeezed him against her own chest. Her eyes remained uneasy, but her smile crept in as she caressed the bear's tattered cheek with her own. The man gave a small, content nod, stood up, and walked back toward the opening to the alley. He stopped 10 feet or so from the wall of onlookers who were not looking. I somehow figured their flow had not wavered throughout any of this. Back and forth the sheep hustled, staring downward at the glow of their phones, a sea of empty eyes. That was when I saw it, the most disturbing thing I would see throughout this insane ordeal. What was embedded in his eyes? Fear. Besting and castrating demons had been his Tuesday evening, but now he looked on the throng of passers-by as if he were watching a loved one fall from a cliff. And I swear on my life, a tear ran down his stone-chiseled cheek. I hadn't even noticed the girl move, but suddenly she was by his side, teddy bear tucked safely under her arm. She slipped her hand into his. She barely had the girth to reach around his thumb. He looked down on her with a brief mask of confusion. She smiled up at him through the layers of grime, her eyes still managed to twinkle. His mask drained, leaving the brightest spark of gratitude, and perhaps even love, peeking out from behind those marbled features. The girl turned to me, baffling me to no end. I was beginning to feel like an audience for a play. Her big eyes narrowed, but a smile slashed across her face. I'm still not sure whether it was smugness or spite. The three of them merged into the throng and disappeared. The few seconds I watched them leave, I pondered their existence. Afterward, I pondered my own.